Elijah Caldwell sat on the porch of Red Rock Range, a piece of land he had recently acquired in the rolling hills just beyond city limits. He had chosen this secluded spot for its tranquility, never suspecting it would become the backdrop to an unexpected confrontation. On that fateful afternoon, Elijah was reviewing some paperwork related to a federal narcotics division operation in which he played a covert role. He had been painstakingly setting up surveillance equipment around the property, convinced that the isolated location would be ideal for observing certain cartel activities from a discreet vantage point. It was amid this careful preparation that a voice sliced through the calm. "What do you think you're doing on this land?" a woman demanded. Elijah, taken by surprise, looked up to see a stranger, later identified as Karen, standing at the edge of his yard with an air of indignation. She glared at him as though convinced she had found an intruder. Her posture and tone suggested she was prepared to escalate matters if she believed he did not belong there. Unbeknownst to Karen, Elijah was more than just a resident. He was collaborating with authorities to document suspicious shipments and movements near his property, all linked to an ongoing federal sting. The quiet ranch scenery masked the high-stakes nature of his work, but its strategic location was the key to gathering crucial evidence against suspected traffickers. Karen, however, had no inkling that there was more to Red Rock Range than met the eye, or that Elijah's presence was anything but coincidental. "Who are you, and why are you on my land?" Karen repeated. Her accusatory tone and the way she marched forward betrayed her certainty that Elijah was trespassing. She knew nothing of the covert cameras discreetly placed around the perimeter, nor of the logs Elijah kept cataloging suspicious vehicle traffic at odd hours. In her mind, this was simply her neighborhood, her rules, and he was violating them. Maintaining a calm facade, Elijah tried to diffuse the tension. "Ma'am, I can assure you I have a legal right to be here. This property is mine," he said evenly. But Karen remained unconvinced, her eyes sweeping over the equipment he had set up. From her perspective, it all appeared highly suspect: cables running to remote sensors, a laptop loaded with surveillance software, and boxes labeled with technical jargon she did not recognize. The hostility in Karen's stance grew increasingly pronounced. She alluded to outsiders, who had no business in the area, her words dripping with the implication that his presence was an affront to the established order. Elijah sensed the confrontation was on the brink of erupting into something far more serious. His heart pounded, not with fear but with a grim understanding that her interference could jeopardize months of careful preparation for the Federal Narcotics Division's sting. Thus began a clash of wills on Red Rock Range, Elijah Caldwell versus Karen, the self-appointed guardian of local propriety. Neither had planned for the day to unfold so dramatically, yet here they were, each determined to defend their perceived territory. What Karen did not realize was that her intrusion on Elijah's land was more than a personal slight. It threatened the delicate balance of a federal investigation whose success hinged on Red Rock Range remaining unnoticed by prying eyes, Karen's included. After that first unsettling encounter, Elijah Caldwell reflected on how much had changed since he acquired Red Rock Range. His primary goal had been to escape the clamor of city life and find refuge in a tranquil environment. A place where he could quietly contribute to the Federal Narcotics Division's operation without drawing unwanted attention. Little did he know that his arrival would trigger the ire of Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA regulations. Elijah quickly discovered that Karen's authority was not official, yet she wielded influence by relentlessly citing neighborhood rules and guidelines. The HOA, though structured and meant to maintain order, often operated under her unyielding scrutiny. Elijah had hoped to keep a low profile, certain that no one would suspect a federal sting unfolding on a secluded piece of ranch land. But Karen's determination to uphold what she perceived as community standards shattered that hope. In his first few weeks at Red Rock Range, Elijah received a stream of written notices from the HOA. Each outlined seemingly inconsequential violations. Grass that wasn't trimmed to the exact specified length, a fence that didn't match the neighborhood's preferred shade of brown, and equipment on the property that was considered unsightly. In truth, the presence of surveillance gear and discrete sensor arrays only bolstered Karen's suspicions, though she lacked any understanding of their true purpose. Elijah tried to address these demands calmly, aware that revealing too much would compromise the operation. Nonetheless, every time he made a small concession, like repainting the fence or concealing certain pieces of gear, Karen found a new complaint to lodge. He sensed her watchful eyes tracking his every move, as if waiting for the slightest misstep to brand him a troublemaker. Despite her hostility, Elijah made efforts to understand the HOA guidelines and comply wherever possible. He trimmed hedges, tidied the yard, and even repainted a shed. Yet, no matter how closely he followed the rules, Karen remained dissatisfied, apparently convinced that his presence spelled trouble for the neighborhood. Rumors began circulating that a new resident was stirring up chaos at Red Rock Range, which only inflamed Karen's resolve. Meanwhile, Elijah remained focused on his secret obligations to the Federal Narcotics Division. He had to be cautious. Any hint that he was involved in a larger federal mission could send the targets of the investigation underground. Balancing the demands of an increasingly aggressive HOA with the operational constraints of a covert sting was no small feat. Tensions built day by day, each notice or complaint a reminder that his carefully laid plans could unravel if Karen escalated her campaign of suspicion too far. Still, Elijah clung to a hope that compromise was possible. Perhaps, he reasoned, Karen's relentless approach was fueled by a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with time. But as the weeks passed, it became evident that her hostility showed no signs of abating. Unbeknownst to either of them, events were already in motion that would push their clash to a point of no return, with consequences that neither had foreseen. The simmering tension between Elijah Caldwell and Karen reached a boiling point when Elijah discovered a small, inconspicuous drone buzzing overhead as he walked across Red Rock Range. Initially, he thought it belonged to a hobbyist or a passing enthusiast. But after observing the drone's persistent surveillance of his land, Elijah recognized it as yet another intrusion from the vigilant neighbor who refused to let him live in peace. He watched from the edge of his porch, noting the drone's repeated sweeps and circling patterns. Karen's boldness in deploying such technology spoke volumes about her determination. She was clearly bent on finding any new violation, anything that would bolster her next complaint to the HOA. Yet, for Elijah, the intrusion was more than just a nuisance. It threatened the secrecy of his covert activities on behalf of the Federal Narcotics Division. A single photograph of his specialized surveillance equipment could tip off the targets of the ongoing sting. After a few days of enduring the drone's relentless presence, Elijah decided he had to act. Late one afternoon, as the drone whirred overhead, he raised a rifle, legally owned and typically reserved for protecting livestock, and took careful aim. A shot rang out, echoing across the quiet hills. The drone tumbled from the sky, landing in a twisted heap of plastic and wires near the boundary fence. Word traveled quickly. Neighbors reported hearing a gunshot, and Karen wasted no time in rushing to the scene to confront Elijah. She appeared visibly enraged, brandishing a phone to capture the wreckage on video as evidence of Elijah's so-called violent behavior. She accused him of endangering the community, claiming that only someone with something to hide would respond so aggressively. Elijah, who had chosen this moment carefully, at a time when no one else was on or near the property, calmly explained he was defending his privacy. He pointed out that her drone had been trespassing in airspace over his land without permission, effectively spying on his movements. Karen brushed aside his explanation, retorting that the HOA had every right to ensure compliance through any means necessary. Before the argument could escalate further, Elijah retrieved the remains of the drone and placed them inside a storage container, fully intending to show local authorities what had invaded his property. Karen, seething with rage, stormed off, presumably to lodge a formal complaint or perhaps to plan a more forceful strategy. Little did she realize, Elijah's motivation for shooting down the drone was rooted not only in a desire to protect his privacy, but also to safeguard the Federal Narcotics Division's ongoing operation. Every unauthorized image or video posed a serious risk to the complex sting operation. If Karen intended to escalate the matter with the HOA or the authorities, Elijah prepared himself to defend his actions, and his mission, every step of the way. In the aftermath of the drone incident, the already strained relationship between Elijah Caldwell and Karen deteriorated at an alarming pace. News of the confrontation circulated through the community's informal grapevine, sparking curiosity and concern. Some neighbors quietly sympathized with Elijah. Drone surveillance struck many as an extreme invasion of privacy. Others felt uneasy about a resident discharging a firearm, no matter the provocation. Though Elijah made an effort to go about his daily routines. Checking perimeter cameras, updating logs for the Federal Narcotics Division, tending to what little livestock he kept, he found himself inundated with fresh complaints. The HOA notices arrived weekly now, each listing new infractions that Karen purportedly observed or learned about through anonymous tips. While some were so far-fetched as to be laughable, each one demanded Elijah's time and energy to refute. As he combed through the latest set of accusations, a more pressing concern emerged. Elijah discovered signs that someone had been accessing his water supply. It began with a noticeable drop in water pressure at odd hours, followed by footprints leading away from a concealed well housing on the edge of Red Rock Range. Investigating further, he found evidence of tampering, freshly disturbed earth around the well piping, a suspicious extension of hose that trailed beyond the property line. The realization struck him like a jolt. Karen was siphoning water for her elaborate garden, which, from rumors he'd heard, was the pride of her meticulously manicured world. The discovery left Elijah fuming. As a property owner, he'd maintained the well responsibly, ensuring a clean and stable supply for his daily needs and any potential expansions. Now, learning that Karen was effectively stealing from him, he felt both violated and outraged. The notion that she was brazen enough to tap his private resource while simultaneously painting him as a neighborhood menace was too galling to ignore. Yet, Elijah sensed an opportunity, too. Exposing Karen's hypocrisy might prove useful in turning the tide of public opinion, which had been somewhat hesitant. Before making any moves, he meticulously photographed the footprints, the hoses, and the slight modifications in the well's cover. He documented it all, capturing timestamps on each image. Then, rather than confronting Karen directly, he decided on a more calculated approach. One that would let her own actions backfire in spectacular fashion. Retaliation, he reasoned, would have to be measured but decisive. After consulting with an old friend in the area, someone well-versed in property disputes, Elijah devised a plan. In the quiet dark of early morning, he disabled part of Karen's illicit irrigation setup, cutting off her supply and causing her meticulously tended plants to receive sporadic surges of either too much or too little water. The chaos that followed would be enough to disrupt her precious garden, and perhaps push her to reveal more of her underhanded tactics. Indeed, within days, the neighborhood buzzed with stories of Karen's garden woes. She complained vocally about wilting flowers and erratic water flow. She demanded an investigation by the HOA, claiming that Elijah must be tampering with her irrigation. Yet again, the hypocrisy of her position was mind-boggling. She was, after all, the one siphoning his well in the first place. Meanwhile, Elijah calmly waited for the situation to evolve. Though a part of him felt uneasy resorting to sabotage, he reminded himself that Karen's own illegal tapping had forced his hand. Moreover, the entire fiasco threatened the secrecy of the Federal Narcotics Division operation. Should Karen dig too deeply, she could unknowingly expose more than just her own wrongdoing. She might compromise months of federal work. Thus, each step he took had to be precisely calculated, designed to keep her off balance while preserving his carefully staged cover. The infiltration of his well and the subsequent sabotage ignited a new wave of whispered drama in the community. Some neighbors expressed sympathy for Elijah, suspecting there was more to the story than Karen let on. Others sided with Karen, claiming that nothing justified messing with someone's garden, no matter how shady their tactics. The HOA found itself at the center of the dispute once again, inundated with claims and counterclaims. For Elijah, it became a question of timing. He recognized that revealing Karen's theft too soon might not have the desired impact. He needed to gather just enough proof and wait for Karen to escalate her rhetoric. Only then could he unveil the contradiction of a woman who publicly championed neighborhood standards while secretly flouting them for her own benefit. That unveiling could be the key to undermining her entire campaign against him. And so, Elijah continued his clandestine work, maintaining an outward facade of a homeowner caught in an unending cycle of petty conflict. Beneath that surface, however, he was deeply attuned to every subtle shift in Karen's behavior. Whether she realized it or not, her every move, every false complaint and every misguided attempt at sabotage, was being tracked and catalogued alongside the logs he kept for the Federal Narcotics Division. The stage was set for an inevitable confrontation that would go far beyond broken locks, bullet-riddled drones, and stolen water, ultimately testing the mettle of both parties in a showdown that would shape the future of Red Rock Range. Even as Elijah Caldwell and Karen wrestled with each other's actions over wells and gardens, the stakes rose dramatically when Karen introduced an entirely new threat. It arrived one afternoon in the form of a thin, official-looking envelope placed conspicuously on Elijah's porch. Inside was an accusatory letter that declared him a suspect in harboring illegal substances, an allegation that, should it gain traction, could jeopardize the secret Federal Narcotics Division operation in ways neither of them fully understood. The contents of the letter cited multiple reports from Karen, claiming she'd observed suspicious packages arriving at Red Rock Range and unusual odors emanating from outbuildings. Most unnerving, however, was the hint that local law enforcement had already been contacted to investigate further. Elijah recognized that if this accusation gained momentum, the hidden federal mission tracking cartel affiliates could be compromised, and his role within it risked exposure. Not only that, but a misdirected police raid could upend the entire sting operation. By now, Elijah had accepted that Karen's crusade was fueled by more than just rule enforcement or even petty resentment. There seemed to be an almost personal vendetta behind her every move. Yet, this accusation felt like an escalation too far. Accusing someone of involvement with drugs wasn't a minor nuisance, it threatened to place a permanent mark of suspicion on Elijah's name and possibly sabotage months of federal work. Swift action was needed. So he made a call to his contact in the Federal Narcotics Division. Without betraying too many specifics, Elijah was always cautious about phone conversations. He explained that a local meddler was attempting to frame him. They arranged a discreet meet-up, choosing an out-of-town diner where neither Karen nor any of her circle would think to look. Over coffee, Elijah laid out the letter and the background of Karen's harassment, as well as the continuing infiltration of the cartel suspects in the region. His contact, a seasoned agent named Ramirez, studied the accusations with a grave expression. "This could be used against us if the wrong people catch wind," she said, tapping the letter with a pen. "We're walking a tightrope here. The last thing we want is official suspicion cast on you, especially if it distracts local authorities from the real targets." Elijah nodded, aware that every day his cover remained intact was another day the larger operation could proceed unhindered. It was during this conversation that Ramirez revealed a surprising twist. Karen had actually provided a tip to the Federal Narcotics Division, believing she was helping build a case against Elijah. Unwittingly, she'd passed along small bits of intel that actually helped them map cartel movements in and around the area. In her misguided attempt to brand Elijah a criminal, Karen had inadvertently become a minor informant, though she remained utterly ignorant of the bigger picture. Ramirez chuckled darkly at the irony, but Elijah only felt a knot form in his stomach. The more Karen meddled, the greater the risk of a catastrophic mix-up. Returning to Red Rock Range, Elijah considered his next steps. He needed to neutralize Karen's baseless drug accusations before they reached too many ears. He also needed to ensure the Federal Narcotics Division's sting remained on track. This balancing act grew more precarious by the day. The best approach, he concluded, was to continue documenting everything. If the time came to confront Karen's claims publicly, he would rely on undeniable proof, timestamps, receipts, and, if necessary, the testimony of federal agents who could attest to his innocence, albeit without revealing the entire sting. Yet, tension gnawed at him. Each moment spent addressing Karen's wild allegations was a moment stolen from the more critical mission. He was reminded daily of the shipments rumored to be passing through the area, each possibly linked to a sprawling narcotics network. A single slip in secrecy could topple the delicate arrangement that allowed him to funnel information to the authorities without spooking the cartel operators. Undeterred, Karen pressed on. Her confidence skyrocketed now that she believed she was helping law enforcement. Neighbors whispered about a criminal living among them, though few dared to confront Elijah directly, especially after hearing about the earlier drone takedown and the rumors that he was no easy target. Some neighbors, unsure what to believe, retreated into polite distance, hoping not to be implicated in the swirling tensions. Others, more open-minded, quietly offered Elijah words of encouragement, suspecting that Karen's theatrical accusations were missing key facts. As the days passed, the Federal Narcotics Division ramped up the pace of their inquiry. Ramirez informed Elijah that they planned to initiate a staged meeting on his ranch, hoping to lure certain cartel players into the open. The idea was to use Red Rock Range as a believable front for illicit deals, all while capturing evidence to dismantle the ring. The success of that plan hinged on Karen not causing a well-timed police raid or stirring public drama at the exact moment critical negotiations were taking place. For Elijah, the sense of living on a knife's edge intensified. Every time he drove into town, he questioned whether a deputy might pull him over in response to Karen's allegations. Every time he entered the ranch gates, he half expected to find a search warrant pinned to his door. But the days rolled on without a confrontation, and he could only hope that, behind the scenes, his careful cooperation with Ramirez was staying the course. Little did either Elijah or the Federal Narcotics Division realize, the final act of this bizarre drama was fast approaching. It would arrive unexpectedly, catalyzed by Karen's unrelenting ambition to root out what she insisted was criminal behavior. In truth, her next move would force a showdown that no one in the quiet hills of Red Rock Range, least of all Elijah, would soon forget. As the tension continued to mount, Elijah Caldwell found himself juggling the complexities of daily life on Red Rock Range while covertly coordinating with the Federal Narcotics Division. He managed to keep his schedule free enough to be available for impromptu meetings with Agent Ramirez, all the while fending off Karen's ongoing allegations. The entire affair was as exhausting as it was surreal. The quiet ranch existence Elijah had sought was overshadowed by harassing notes, HOA complaints, and a looming cartel investigation. The planned, staged meeting at Red Rock Range became the focal point for both the Federal Narcotics Division and Elijah's personal strategy. The premise was relatively straightforward. Certain cartel-affiliated suspects believed the ranch to be a prime location for discreet deals, thanks to the seclusion and rumored willingness of its owner, Elijah, to turn a blind eye to illicit activities. In reality, Elijah was facilitating an elaborate ruse, aided by federal agents. The goal was to draw key players into the open, capturing proof that would seal their fate in court. But as the date for this sting operation drew nearer, Karen unwittingly positioned herself as an unintentional wild card. She had no clue that Elijah's real secret had nothing to do with the drug accusations she'd leveled at him. Motivated by her moral outrage, misguided though it was, she continued feeding scraps of intel to the authorities, sincerely believing she was aiding law enforcement in building a case against Elijah. Every suspicious truck or late-night visitor she reported turned out to be one more puzzle piece that helped federal agents confirm cartel movements in the area. Behind the scenes, Elijah and Agent Ramirez marveled at the irony. Karen was effectively assisting them, yet she remained an obstacle if she decided to escalate her accusations at the wrong moment. A rumor circulated that she had tried to broker a meeting with someone in charge of local law enforcement. She had boasted to neighbors that she possessed damning evidence, photos of certain illegal structures on Elijah's property, in reality, discrete setups for capturing audio and visual data vital to the sting. People who had heard Karen's declarations mostly dismissed them as typical dramatics, but Elijah knew even misguided allegations could prove disastrous if official attention arrived prematurely. When the evening of the staged meeting finally came, Elijah felt the weight of the entire operation pressing down on him. Dusk fell over the rolling hills, painting Red Rock Range in long, cool shadows. By design, the ranch appeared silent and unguarded, a perfect setting for a clandestine rendezvous. Federal agents, scattered discreetly around the property, waited to record every word once the cartel associates arrived. The plan was simple. Keep Karen away, or at least oblivious, until the meeting concluded. Unfortunately, fate, or perhaps Karen's unrelenting suspicion, had other ideas. Sensing unusual activity, Karen decided that night would be her chance to tip the scales irrevocably in her favor. Concealing herself in the darkness, she watched as a pair of black SUVs made their way up Elijah's long driveway. In her mind, this confirmed her worst fears, that Elijah was hosting criminals. With phone in hand, she crept closer to the property line, intending to gather photographic evidence that would secure her a place in the annals of heroic do-gooders, or so she thought. Inside Red Rock Range, Elijah took position with Ramirez, monitoring the arrival of the vehicles through hidden cameras. Tension coiled in his stomach as he recognized the suspects stepping out, each one on the list of suspected cartel affiliates. This was the moment they'd meticulously orchestrated, a single chance to expose these individuals. Agent Ramirez, half hidden in a makeshift command center within the barn, signaled that everything was on track. Karen, however, edged dangerously near the perimeter. She unwittingly placed herself in the crosshairs of a high-stakes federal bust. If she were to interfere, any confrontation could give the suspects reason to flee, ruining months of planning. Worse, if she confronted them directly, her own safety would be in grave peril. Alarmed by her presence on the camera feed, Elijah fought to decide whether to risk stepping outside to warn her or remain hidden. In the end, circumstance took the decision from him. As the suspects gathered to talk near Elijah's porch, Karen, heart pounding, burst from the shadows, smartphone raised like a pistol. "I've got you all on camera," she shouted, her voice shaking with both fear and misguided righteousness. Agent Ramirez, hearing the outburst, cursed under her breath, quickly signaling for the tactical unit to move in. The entire sting, timed to be meticulously covert, was now on the brink of chaos. What followed was a flurry of confusion. The cartel suspects, startled by the sudden intrusion, hastily reached for their vehicles. Agents emerged from hidden positions, shouting commands. Karen, realizing too late the danger she'd inserted herself into, retreated in terror toward her car, phone clutched in trembling hands. Through the chaos, Elijah's voice cut through the din, urging everyone to stand down. He worried that one wrong move could spark a violent confrontation, putting every life at risk. Finally, in a remarkable display of professionalism, the federal agents managed to subdue the suspects without shots being fired. Karen, meanwhile, stood off to the side, her eyes wide with shock. She had believed she was about to expose Elijah's criminal enterprise, never guessing that the real criminals were in the process of being apprehended. In that moment, the illusions she'd built for herself crumbled, leaving her at the center of a fiasco that jeopardized not only her standing in the neighborhood but also her safety. As the arrests were made and the immediate crisis diffused, Elijah took a breath of ragged relief. The delicate operation had survived Karen's intrusion, but at a steep cost to everyone's nerves. The tension that had simmered for weeks had exploded into a full-blown confrontation, revealing that Karen's meddling was no longer just a personal matter, it was a hazard that threatened to unravel both the quiet life at Red Rock Range and the broader goals of the Federal Narcotics Division. In the tumultuous wake of that chaotic evening, the fallout reached every corner of the community. Although the Federal Narcotics Division had managed to apprehend several cartel affiliates with minimal bloodshed, the sting was nearly derailed by Karen's interference. News of the arrests rippled through official channels, while the locals whispered tales of nighttime raids on Red Rock Range. No one, least of all Karen, emerged from the ordeal without facing the consequences of their actions. Within a day of the operation, Elijah Caldwell found himself summoned for a debrief with Agent Ramirez. In a quiet, impromptu meeting on the outskirts of town, Ramirez congratulated him on the ultimate success of the mission yet voiced grave concerns about how close they'd come to a disastrous confrontation. "Karen's meddling almost blew our cover entirely," she said, her voice still charged with residual tension. We got the suspects, yes, but we lost the element of stealth we were banking on for future leads. Now the entire network might go underground. Elijah nodded solemnly. The fiasco had cost him as well. His anonymity in the area was all but shattered, and rumors pegging him as everything from a local vigilante to a secret agent had started circulating. The abrupt infiltration of cartel suspects onto his land was enough to brand him suspicious in the eyes of neighbors who once merely thought of him as an aloof newcomer. To complicate matters, Karen continued to spin her own narrative, loudly painting herself as a concerned citizen who almost single-handedly helped the authorities catch criminals. The irony was as thick as the dust that still covered his porch from the SUV's departure. But Karen's bravado was short-lived. It wasn't long before official scrutiny turned her way, too. In the heat of the operation, she had tried to curry favor with federal agents, peddling claims of Elijah's supposed wrongdoing and offering additional evidence that existed only in her imagination. She requested immunity from prosecution for her involvement, evidently misunderstanding how the law actually worked. The absurdity of her position was not lost on those present. Where Karen envisioned herself as a heroic whistleblower, the authorities recognized she was a liability, a bungling civilian who had nearly foiled a complex sting. In the subsequent days, a formal investigation began delving into the extent of Karen's actions, from the illicit tapping of Elijah's well to her repeated false allegations. To Elijah's relief, the evidence he had compiled, photographs, timestamps, recorded interactions, substantiated every claim he had made. Coupled with the Federal Narcotics Division's own logs, it became apparent that Karen had misused local structures, including the HOA, to wage a private crusade against him. Galvanized by Karen's overreach, some neighbors who had previously remained neutral started to reevaluate their stance. Folks who had once accepted her lofty pronouncements now saw the flaws in her self-righteous facade. The HOA, especially, was taken aback by revelations of Karen's misappropriation of influence, if not outright misuse of community funds. Elijah uncovered documentation suggesting that Karen had diverted association resources into personal projects, likely how she financed her watchful drone and other meddling efforts. Seizing the moment, Elijah presented his findings at a special neighborhood assembly. Where once he had been hesitant to speak publicly, he now recognized the importance of bringing the community together to confront the manipulations they had all endured. He laid out the facts, from the broken drone to the well tapping, the sabotage of irrigation lines, and ultimately the near ruination of the Federal Narcotics Division sting. As he spoke, a hush fell over the assembled residents, many of whom exchanged uncomfortable glances. Realizing they had, in various ways, turned a blind eye or given Karen carte blanche under the guise of upholding community standards, they began to question the entire premise of the feud. Karen, notably absent from the meeting, was nonetheless the focal point of every discussion. A few residents did attempt to defend her, suggesting her actions were driven by safety concerns, but the chorus of doubts soon drowned out such arguments. Too many lines had been crossed, too many innocent or misguided accusations made. By the session's end, a strong majority voted for a motion to remove Karen from any position of influence within the HOA, pending a formal investigation into her conduct. It was a turning point not just for Elijah, but for the entire community. Freed from Karen's domineering approach, neighbors began to reevaluate how they handled local governance and what they truly wanted from a homeowner association. Elijah, finally recognized as someone who had strived to remain aboveboard, found new allies who apologized for believing the worst rumors and pledged to help restore a spirit of cooperation in the neighborhood. With Karen's authority unraveling, it seemed only a matter of time before the broader legal consequences of her actions came home to roost. Elijah kept in close contact with Agent Ramirez, who, despite the operation's complications, expressed gratitude that they'd managed to apprehend the key targets. For Elijah, this shift in the community's perspective represented a chance to return his focus to the quieter routines of ranch life, though he remained vigilant. Past experience had shown that even a cornered adversary can still lash out. But as rumors of Karen's looming arrest circulated, it appeared that, for once, justice was catching up faster than she could manufacture another accusation. The atmosphere at Red Rock Range transformed once Karen's influence began to wane. Without her constant complaints and intrusive presence, Elijah Caldwell was finally able to breathe easily and tend to his responsibilities, both as a resident and as a quiet collaborator with the Federal Narcotics Division. The sense of relief was palpable, not only for Elijah but also among neighbors who had grown weary of Karen's draconian approach to every minor violation. Amid this evolving tranquility, the HOA took steps to restore trust in the neighborhood. A new interim board was organized, focusing on transparency and collaboration. Residents who had previously remained on the fence voiced support for fairer guidelines and a more open-minded approach to community living. Elijah was gratified to see these developments, even if he chose not to get involved directly in HOA business. For him, the quieter environment simply meant he could refocus on the tasks at hand without worrying about petty interference. Yet, there were still whispers about the final resolution of Karen's saga. Some neighbors reported seeing unmarked cars by her house, presumably agents gathering evidence for a looming legal case. Others claimed she was preparing to flee Meadowvale altogether, though that rumor turned out to be untrue. She remained in her home, seemingly in denial about her waning control over the community she had once dominated. Elijah, meanwhile, completed the last bits of data collection for the Federal Narcotics Division. Thanks to the arrests made during the staged meeting, the operation was entering its concluding phase. Agent Ramirez confided that while they had lost some potential leads due to Karen's botched interruption, they had enough to dismantle key nodes in the cartel's local network. For Elijah, it was a bittersweet victory, culminating months of delicate work overshadowed by a meddling neighbor who had nearly compromised everything. In the calm that followed, Elijah found an odd sense of belonging. Neighbors who had once eyed him with suspicion now waved or offered polite greetings. Some even knocked on his door to formally welcome him to the area, an overdue gesture, but one he appreciated. With each small act of civility, Elijah felt a renewed conviction that Red Rock Range might indeed become the peaceful haven he had originally envisioned. The days ticked by uneventfully, a quiet coda to the turmoil that had rattled the community. Karen's name came up less and less in conversation, and Elijah's part in a federal sting remained a well-kept secret. The synergy of normalcy and security he had so craved was finally within reach, though a faint tension still lingered at the margins, an awareness that Karen's influence had not entirely disappeared. As Elijah locked the gate one soft twilight evening, he paused to admire the silhouette of his newly strengthened fence and the gentle outline of the ranch in the fading light. The storm had passed, leaving him poised to build the life he wanted at Red Rock Range. Unbeknownst to him, the last chapter in Karen's saga was fast approaching, and it would bring consequences that would finally set in stone the future of the community he now called home. Several weeks had elapsed since the tension at Red Rock Range had calmed. Elijah Caldwell was finally settling into the rhythm of a more peaceful existence. The last of the Federal Narcotics Division's tasks wrapped up quietly, and neighbors now saw him less as a mysterious newcomer and more as just another resident going about his daily life. In some corners of the community, though, murmurs persisted about what had really transpired during the raid and Karen's role in it all. Rumors swirled that Karen was on the verge of legal consequences. Documents surfaced revealing her mismanagement of HOA funds, and a handful of neighbors discovered that she had funneled resources toward her private vendettas, like acquiring surveillance equipment for Neighborhood Watch that was never officially approved. The fresh evidence dovetailed with Elijah's compiled documentation of her trespasses and false accusations. Finally, the moment arrived. Karen was taken into custody on charges related to misuse of funds and providing fraudulent information to authorities. The news spread like wildfire. Residents who had once rallied behind her, believing her to be a vigilant guardian of the neighborhood, felt blindsided. Some expressed a measure of pity, while others admitted they were relieved to see her influence come to an overdue end. For Elijah, the entire affair was a study in quiet vindication. He did not celebrate openly or dwell on Karen's downfall, but the sense of relief was undeniable. He recognized that her arrest was as much a product of her own unscrupulous actions as it was of the thorough record-keeping he had maintained. In many ways, her downfall served as a cautionary tale about wielding power without accountability, a lesson that resonated throughout the community. In the days that followed, the HOA strove to reorganize itself with an emphasis on fair representation and oversight. A new board was elected, composed of individuals who seemed committed to transparency and open dialogue. Elijah watched from the sidelines, content that the neighborhood was healing itself. Meanwhile, neighbors, newly appreciative of his calm demeanor during the crisis, made it a point to invite him to small get-togethers and backyard barbecues. Slowly, Red Rock Range began to feel more like a home rather than a battleground. Life carried on with a renewed sense of collaboration. The petty disputes that had once festered under Karen's reign of intimidation gave way to neighborly cooperation, shared tool borrowing, friendly yard advice, and even a monthly potluck at the community clubhouse. Freed from fear and suspicion, the neighborhood discovered a unity it had long lacked. Though Elijah suspected another crisis might one day arise, for now he welcomed the normalcy. With Karen in custody and the Federal Narcotics Division satisfied with the operation's outcome, he had the rare luxury of focusing solely on personal goals, maybe even the pursuit of genuine friendship among neighbors who had once regarded him with suspicion. In the quiet calm that settled over Red Rock Range, Elijah savored a well-earned peace, hopeful that it would endure despite the trials they had weathered together. Life at Red Rock Range settled into a rhythm of calm cooperation in the weeks following Karen's arrest. Elijah Caldwell, at last, found himself free from the endless cycle of complaints and conflicts that had once dominated his daily routine. He used this newfound peace to refine the ranch, enjoying the solace for which he had originally sought the property. Word spread that Karen had been charged not only with misuse of HOA funds but also with obstruction of a federal investigation. Her misguided attempts at forging evidence and interfering in official matters had backfired dramatically. Facing an array of legal repercussions, she was unable to maintain her foothold in the community she had tried so fervently to control. With Karen gone, the neighbors felt a collective weight lift from their shoulders. The HOA adjusted its governance, vowing to uphold regulations without succumbing to the tyranny of any single member. Residents began collaborating on small improvements, repairing communal fences, repainting the neighborhood entrance, and even planting a shared vegetable garden. Each initiative stood as a testament to what could be achieved when fear and suspicion yielded to goodwill. Elijah, for his part, took measures to safeguard Red Rock Range from future intrusions. He reinforced fences and installed new motion sensor lighting along the driveway to deter any would-be trespassers. More importantly, he maintained the valuable relationships he had fostered with key neighbors, finding allies where once he had faced only skepticism. The entire property, once overshadowed by tensions, became a symbol of resilience. It had weathered a storm of hostility and emerged steadier than before. Meanwhile, the Federal Narcotics Division concluded their operation, having gathered enough evidence to dismantle crucial segments of the cartel's local network. Though the sting had risked exposure more than once, chiefly through Karen's interference, the outcome ultimately proved successful. Elijah discreetly closed that chapter of his life, grateful for the resolution but eager to move forward in a simpler fashion. As the community continued to flourish, Elijah stood on his porch one calm evening, gazing at the sunset that painted the sky in vibrant oranges and reds. He marveled at how a place once cloaked in suspicion could become the very picture of neighborhood harmony. True, the adversity they'd all endured had been steep, but in overcoming it, they'd created a stronger sense of belonging. In that moment, as he breathed in the crisp air of dusk, Elijah allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Red Rock Range had become more than just a vantage point for a covert mission. It was now his home, a home that overcame conflicts, meddling neighbors, and even hidden cartel threats. The future stretched out before him, serene and full of potential, unburdened by the specter of Karen's meddling. And in that peaceful hush of twilight, Elijah resolved that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and his neighbors would face them together, united by the lessons learned from a trial that had tested them all.